to get you ready, as I promised you, for the test, which means we're going to talk about that test today. And make sure you know what's on this test, what we're covering, what we're talking about, and what to prepare for. First of all, I got to go blow my nose one more time.
Yeah.
Well, last week at this time it was 15 degrees out and snowing, I think. Wasn't it?
Hush, 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 hush.
Huh? Well, it's supposed to be.
You stop it, you.
I think that was an anomaly. I don't think we're going to have a lot of
That is a very bad, 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 bad word.
Huh?
See?
When they snowed, I went out and bought all that salt from my apartment complex. And I was just sitting in my front room.
Yeah. People
Just
probably got
waiting for the
snow
next one.
blowers and snow shovels and tractors and salt and sand and.
You'll use it.
Yeah, I was
Just not right now.
like, this salt ain't gonna go bad.
Nope.
Don't go back.
Gang, what do we talk about? Psychology and addiction. And I'll tell you what, like I said, your psychology books or anything else, we have jumped out of the pages of that book in so many ways. As we most recently started talking about assessment, the risks to early recovery, all those things, guys. Every day we walk out of here, stuff, basic information, how to be a better counselor. And one of the biggest questions we have, again, how do we understand this? How do we understand when basically, what was that $20,000 question? When basically normal, not stupid, not crazy, not immoral people end up doing so many abnormal, stupid, crazy, immoral things. How do we understand that? And it's just calling it a disease isn't even close to enough. So what? We call it a disease. What do we do about it? We need to understand the stuff of human behavior if we're going to understand the stuff of this very complex human behavior. And so we were looking at psychology and addiction. And we're going to continue with that next semester when we get into the brain. And again, physiology. Be reading over the break the physiology chapter in your books and anything. We're going to get into how that brain works and what that's all about and how drugs work and neuropharmacology and all that kind of stuff. But this semester we did look at some very important issues related to understanding, again, human behavior. And what did we say? Addiction is just another human behavior. And if you want to understand addiction, you need to understand human behavior. That's all there is to it. And so, pardon me. And so we delved into, well, the first unit of study wasn't so much about behavior. It was about how we understand the way we try and understand behavior. And of course, that was the stuff of research and that. And we looked at, and guys, why? Why is research so important? Again, well, number one, you're going to be spending, whether you do research one day, your entire career, or never. The fact is, you may decide you're going to just become great counselors and forget about the research stuff. Let somebody else do that. That's great. We need some great counselors. But you're going to be consuming the results of other people's research for the rest of your career. You need to know the difference between good, bad science, how to use this stuff. How even good science can become bad science if it's misused. All those kinds of things like that. You need to know when somebody is selling you an idea. Hey, we did this, we did that, look at this, here's the outcome, isn't this fantastic, do it this way. You need to know, did they do that well? Did they make that observation well? Which means you need to know what is a good observation. How do you do it well? All that kind of stuff like that. So working with that, understanding. Another really big important thing with this was what? The idea of, again, counselor attractiveness. Attractive to your future employers. I'll tell you what, gang, the government has been hollering about this for a long time, and one of these days they're going to actually, I think, surprise the hell out, shock the hell out of some of these programs. We've been telling you this, and now it's time. We either need some research here or else we're going to cut your funding. You wait and see. It's going to happen. And the thing is that those programs are going to need people that know this stuff, understand this stuff, care about this, appreciate the importance of this stuff, can help. Well, you know what, we can think about that, we can try this, we can try that. You need to understand the research enterprise. You're going to be practicing scientists. You see what I mean? Counseling, clinical psychology. What is clinical psychology? The scientific study of the change process. Those kinds of things like that. Understanding this stuff. And you guys you're going to be practicing scientists. You need to know how to behave and think like scientists. The second unit then was what? The learning theory. Look at how one thing after another. One thing we talked about, how many times did we jump out of Pavlov's lab, Skinner's box, so to speak, and into real life, looking at not only addiction, but human behavior in general, understanding this stuff. Look at how classical conditioning, operant conditioning, took what could appear to be on the surface, such wild, outrageous, where is this coming from? I don't get it. I don't understand this behavior. And then just with classical and operant conditioning, way beyond Pavlov's slobbering dogs, all of a sudden we can start to understand this behavior and make sense out of that. And once we can start to understand and make sense out of even anomaly behavior, we can at least, what are the two advantages of that? Number one, we don't have to be so damn mad at it anymore. I don't understand what the hell's wrong with you. How could you even, and that? Boy, does that make me scared. Boy, does that make me pissed off. What was one of the first things we said? You can't help somebody you're so mad at. And the other thing is, as you understand this, can we use that same then understanding to find solutions with this? Not just not be mad at, but actually find solutions with this. How do we help people with this? And gang, classical operant conditioning plays such a wildly important role in addiction. I hope we well illustrated that in our discussions as we talked about that stuff. And then we moved on to process to the product, development and personality. And again, gang, and what did we say when we started process to the product? That now we're going to begin new material, not instead of learning theory, but in addition to all that stuff. Now we're going to throw some more stuff on this pile. It gets a little bit more complicated all the time. How do we become who we become? Including enmeshment and addiction. And those kinds of things like that. How do we become who we become? How do we understand? Hey, that whole discussion we had. The big thing. You need to know your clients now. That's all that matters is the now. That's right. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. What would we say? One of the best ways there is to know the now is to know where that person came from and how they got there. Does that make sense? All that stuff, you guys. Somebody doesn't just wake up one day with a personality disorder like they do a cold or the flu or something like that. It's not like it's got a 48-hour incubation period. You caught a bad case of borderline personality one day. You were 27 years old. No, this stuff has its roots. And again, how all this stuff, our personality, who we are, how we got to be who we are, all that stuff, how does that play a role in understanding now that person's involvement in their current hedonic calculus? So when I say hedonic calculus anymore, do I even have to walk up there? Does the whole thing just start to fly into your brain? The whole hedonic calculus. How does somebody allow themselves to be enmeshed in that hedonic calculus? Why is what those ones, those twos, those threes, those fours, when I say that, do I even have to say what that means anymore? How is it that escape for that person is worth so much to them that they are willing to pay damn near their life, let alone their welfare, their well-being, doing what they're doing for the drugs? How is it that is for that person such an important issue? Those kinds of things like that. Understanding. Gang, don't forget, one of the most important issues in terms of basic counseling was what? Forming that empathy bond. Forming that empathy bond. That client needs to feel felt, truly understood, that you really not only care, but that you understand. And those are two different things. And building that empathy bond. And one of the best ways to build that empathy bond is to speak in that client's experiential language. All these words you keep hearing all semester. Speaking in that client's experiential language. Understanding. Why is this? How this? Why that? Why this? All those things. Why it is so important to this person. May not be important to you, may not be important to the next 57 people that walk along, but it is to this person. How and why is that? And respect that in reality. And know how that fits into their hedonic calculus and their decision making. So that you can speak with this person, interact with, clinically, work with this person via that reality and that person's specific particular life. Does that make sense? All that stuff, understanding that process to the product. Look at how, I mean, you know what, Piaget, I don't think I've ever specifically talked to a client about Piaget, but look at how we use Piaget in so many different ways. To understand, gang, that whole thing about self-esteem, that whole thing about self-image and all that kind of a thing, where does this come from? How can a person, for example, how can a person have and seem to walk around with, and I guess it doesn't bother them, such an atrocious, awful self-opinion, self-evaluation. Where did this come from? How does this, wow. And what we use Piaget with that. That kid in concrete operation stage, Piaget, as they're learning the way the world works. And they've already learned. And one of those good old basic rules, how did it go? Good things happen to good little boys and girls, and bad things happen to bad little boys and girls. And here's this kid now, having some very real ones or twos going on in his or her life. Some pretty bad things. And this kid, who wants to make sense out of this like anybody else. And how does the world work? Good things happen to good little boys and girls. Bad things happen to bad little boys and girls. Something bad is happening to me, therefore I am a
Bad little boy or girl.
Does that stay with that person?
Yes.
Does that friend? Gang, what was another thing we said that goes right along with that? How did it go? Any explanation is better than no explanation. And we're sitting there. How can you like that? How can it feel good to hate yourself? Like, it doesn't. Stop asking those kinds of stupid-ass questions. You counselors. Stop that. Stop. Why would you ask that stupid question? Like, how does it feel good for you? It doesn't. But if that's all that person has as a way to explain this mess in their life for themselves, if that's all they've got, any explanation is better than no explanation. Does that make sense? Do you see that? Imagine having such a horrific set of things going on in your life and not having any explanation at all. That would be a pretty damn vulnerable, scary place to be, wouldn't it? Yes. You see what I'm saying with that? So understanding this stuff, Piaget with that. Hey, we talked about Piaget. How about this one with Piaget? This whole idea that understanding where this person is now, this client that's sitting with you today, in that scheme of stages, that 26, 7-year-old client, they should be in formal operations. I'm going to talk to them like an adult, damn it. They better understand me like an adult. If they don't, that means that they are full of shit. They don't want to hear my message. That's what that means. And it turns out, no, that's not what it means. What it turns out is you failed to assess the fact that that client is still somewhere in concrete operations. You see what I'm saying with this? And the reason why they're not getting it is not because they don't want to get it. It's because you're a dumbass and you're not doing your job right. That's why. I hate dumbass counselors. I don't like them. They screw people's lives up. And that's why. You know, they're always ready to blame the client. The client don't want to get better. They're just full of shit. No, you're the dumbass. Don't be dumbass counselors. You see what I'm saying with this stuff? That kind of a thing like that. Understanding these process to the product issues. Look at how we jumped out of the page of Kohlberg, and then we went to high school that day. Remember that whole story? And what was that? The two big things, self-efficacy, cognitive dissonance resolution issues, all that stuff. All these things that we talked about. And then, of course, we concluded this semester's psychology and addiction with what? The MISA stuff. The very complex issues of understanding the relationship between mental illness and various kinds and levels of mental illness. They're different. Borderline personality disorder can wreck a life just as completely as a case of schizophrenia, but it's not a disease like schizophrenia. Understanding that kind of stuff. Looking at those different classifications and how that stuff comes together and how you understand that. The personality disorders especially. I'll tell you guys what. Of all of the MESA issues you're going to encounter, and unfortunately you are going to encounter schizophrenia, depression, bipolar, severe anxiety stuff, and things like that. The number one thing you're going to encounter are the personality disorders. And understanding how to work with these things and what they're about. And gang, remember, when we talk, what was that thing about personality disorder? This idea. What was that? Oh, I remember the difference between organic and functional. Remember all that stuff. And those personality disorders, those functional disorders, those very well now learned in ways. It's kind of like the hedonic calculus. Look at what you're paying for this, whether it's consuming drugs, alcohol, or those personality disorders. It's the same thing. Look, your life is a wreck. It's a mess. It's a this. It's a that. And you keep doing this. Why? You got to remember something, gang. That person's not going to walk around with a placard, here's why, but there is a why. You need to find it. You need to discover what that is. For that. You see what I'm saying? That client doesn't know. That's why you're there. To find this stuff out. You need to know this stuff that well. This is think on your feet stuff. Again, a lot of this stuff, it's not like one day the client's got a razor blade to their jugular vein. Could you hold that for just a minute? I got to go look something up. No, you better know it. You need this right now. You see what I'm saying with this stuff? You need this stuff right now. You need to know this stuff. So you can use it when you need it. That kind of a thing. And don't forget, there was another reason why you need to know this that well. What was that? Who else needs to know this?
Client.
If only one person one time would have told that person, guess what? This is going to happen. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. Actually, what it really means is your brain's working pretty good. That's what it really, isn't that kind of cool? You see what I'm saying? But if you don't know that stuff, you're not going to teach that stuff to your client, are you? If only those very true stories. If only one day how come somebody didn't one day, this is going to happen? And explain that to that person. You see what I'm saying with this stuff? All that kind of stuff. So understanding those 4 basic areas. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go over this test. Those 4 areas. And hopefully you get your notes and stuff. And, pardon me. For that test, Unit 1. Let's go. And gang, questions. As I go over this stuff and I'm not teaching right now. I'm going to remind you of stuff and I'm going to answer questions. You see, we already taught this stuff. So I'm not going to, there's no way, we're not going to teach all that this morning. But I'm going to remind you of what we talked about and things and then answer questions and do not hesitate. Like, oh shit, I got to ask a question. You see what I'm saying with that? Gang, what did we talk about? Again, the whole idea of research and why that's important and things like that. Hey, what were the 3 levels of the experiment? What were those 3 levels of the experiment?
Quasi was one of them.
Well,
No.
and what I'm going to do is, if I want an answer, I'll say quick quiz. Quick quiz. But I'm just telling you what to be aware of. And we will, quick quiz on that. What were the 3 levels of the experiment? What were they?
One was quasi.
Quasi?
I don't remember.
The true experiment?
Pre-experiment.
And the pre-experiment. Hey, what was that thing we love more than anything else in science? What was that thing called?
T
Quick
plus
quiz. What was
E.
that?
T plus, no.
Pardon me?
T equals.
Well, no, what is it when
Oh.
what do we love most?
That.
I would love to be able to tell you, how did that go? How did that work? 87, then down to 67, 70, do you remember that? And I would love to be able to tell you that cognitive therapy causes lower scores, lower anxiety, cause effect. Remember that?
Oh.
That ultimate knowledge in
Boom.
science, cause effect. If I want to get cause-effect, what level of the experiment do I need to do? Know
True.
that stuff.
True.
The true experiment. The true experiment. The true experiment. We also talked about 3 kinds or levels of research in the first place. And a little history of how research became such an important part of drug and alcohol treatment. What were those 3 levels? Quick quiz. What were those 3 levels? What were they? Number 1 was process level research, where we just, what was that? Like a bill of sale. Process level research, a bill of sale. Yeah, we made the pretty pie charts and the pretty bar charts. This came out around the same time as all that big revolution of personal computers and color printers. And the next thing, and we were making pretty bar charts and pie charts. And what was that? That bill of sale. It basically reported what we were doing, and that was okay for quite a while. But then the government said, it's nice to know what you're doing, but is it working anyway? I see what you're doing, but I'd like to see what is it getting me. You see what I'm saying? And so the second then kind became what? Outcome research. Telling, hey, I provided 600 people with this kind of group therapy. Okay, how many of those 600 people got better? You know what I'm saying? Outcome level research. And then what was that third kind? Anybody? Hypotheses testing, generating new knowledge. Generating new knowledge.
I feel like I'm already going to fail this test.
First one, process.
I forgot most of this.
Aren't you glad I'm talking about it?
I'm so glad you are.
Yeah, the last question I didn't even understand.
Huh?
When you were asking about the levels, I
Just
So
get
you mentioned one.
3 levels.
Hey
Yeah.
gang, we talked about with that. Do know. Be able to read an experiment. We did this, that, the other thing. In an experiment. Be able to identify the independent variable. The dependent variable. Be able to, what are extraneous variables? Be able to identify the independent. Gang, any questions as I go through this stuff? Like I say, I'm reminding, but you gotta, again, help me again with that independent. This is the time to do it right now.
What did you say? The independent?
Well, be able to identify independent variable, dependent variable. What's an extraneous variable? What is a subject variable? All those, any questions with that stuff? Everybody cool? Be able to know.
What is the subject variable?
Subject variable, anything about the person that we're measuring. Yeah, we're doing psychological research. And that doesn't have to be people, it can be animals also, but we figured we're probably not going to build a drug center for rats. So the people, anything about the person we're measuring that could affect that measurement, a subject variable. Anything about that person. Hey, that's going to include a lot of stuff in it. Everything from what? Their genetic heritage, their prenatal environment, every experience they've had from the split second they were born, and everything else. Lots of stuff. Subject variables. That's what we're interested in. And this, take a look at this. What are we studying here? The subject variable, a level of anxiety. Those kinds of things like that. Yes, sir. You had your hand up.
I was wondering what the other, you got the independent subject and what's the other?
Don't forget dependent variable. Hey, and be able to, if I and extraneous. Don't forget, independent, dependent, extraneous. What do? We manipulate independent, we control extraneous, we measure dependent. Be able to identify that kind of stuff in an experiment, what those things are. How they work with that. We control, we just said. Extraneous variables, what were those 4 kinds of control? What did we talk about? Hey, quick quiz. The best way to control subject variables is what?
Random.
Randomization, random sampling, random selection, random assignment, randomization. Hey, true or false? Randomization ensures a representative sample.
False.
False. What is a representative sample, by the way? Don't forget. population sample stuff. Remember, usually the people I want to know about are a whole bunch of people. Way more than I can look at. I get a sample of them. I look at the sample. The sample had better be representative of the population, right? Remember all that stuff we talked about? A representative sample. What's my best way to get a representative sample? Randomization. Does that guarantee anything? Not one bit, but it's the best we got. Does that make sense? Hey, what were the other kinds of control? What were other kinds of control?
Environment.
Pardon me?
Environment.
And how do we, what was that? Control by?
Hold constant.
Holding constant. All those other variables. Same time, same place, same this, same. Remember, guys, remember. What was that only difference principle? How did that go? Anybody tell me what was that only difference principle?
The only difference should be the independent variable.
If I
right?
assume
If
everything
everything
else.
is the same, and everything stays the same, because I am doing randomization, because I am holding constant, doing it, everything stays the same, and the only thing that is different is the independent variable. If they become different, can we blame that difference on the only thing that was different, the independent variable? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
In this case, if the only thing different here is type of therapy, and then they become 67ers and 73ers, can we blame that difference on the only thing that was different, type of therapy? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
You see how that works like that?
But doesn't the isn't there something later that we can, I remember talking about that, we can null hypothesis?
We're going
We
to talk
can-
about that in just a minute.
Okay,
Let's get to that.
okay.
All right, gang. Any questions with that? What was the third kind of control?
Experimental procedures.
Experimental procedures. Being careful with that. I don't want these numbers to be because I looked at you. I want them to be real. I got to control how I look at you. We talked about single blind, double blind. All those different kinds of things like that. And so control. Remember, internal, external validity. Internal and external validity. What was that all about? There was a big discussion we had. Make sure you know the difference between and what that means, what they represent, and why they're important. Internal, external validity.
What is that? Oh.
Hey, we also talked about, well, O equal T plus E. We know that. I refer to that several times throughout every other discussion, don't I? And that kind of a thing. There is no absolute truth, universal law, or anything like that out there. There's nothing that is accurate right about everybody. The only probably universal law in psychology is if you cut off a person's head, they're dead. That'd probably be about it right there. And who knows, we may find that one's not right one of these days. The thing is that we have a major problem. What was that major problem we have? Science is a set of rules for how to look at stuff. And if we follow those rules well, but then we had a major problem. What was that problem? How do you follow a set of rules for how to look at stuff you can't see?
Constructs.
And what was that? The idea of constructs. Constructs. We construct our understanding based on indirect observation and speculation. I've never seen a happy, sad, an attitude, a pissed off. I've never seen any of that stuff. Been working with all that stuff for years and years, but I've never seen any one of those things. The only problem is that constructs don't quite fit the rigors of science. They can be pretty subjective and things like that. Science does love numbers, though, doesn't it? Science loves math. And so then we talked about, what was that term, that phrase, to turn a construct into a number? We do that via what?
Operational judgment.
Operational definition. Remember all that stuff, you guys? Don't forget all that stuff. Operational definition. We love numbers. And then, well, we started talking also about, well, think about this for a minute. If I want to get cause-effect knowledge, I got to do the 2 experiment. That's all 3. Control, manipulate, measure. What if I decide not to for one reason or another? What if I can't for one reason or another? Well, quasi is better than nothing. What is that? What was quasi? Manipulate, measure. What if I can't do quasi? Well, pre's better than nothing. And what was that? Measure alone. We talked about some pre stuff. One example of pre was what? Naturalistic observation. Know what that is? Know what naturalistic observation is. What were its strengths, its weaknesses? Know what that stuff was.
That's the Hawthorne effect, right?
One of the big ones. As a matter of fact, quick. What was the major problem with naturalistic observation?
People act different when they're being watched.
Just watching people changes what they do. The Hawthorne effect. Subject reactivity. Subject reactivity. What was another pre we talked about was what? Survey. What was survey? Any of all kinds of different ways to ask people questions. That could be a very informal, hey, how you doing today, all the way through a very formal and complex neuropsychiatric exam. But survey, asking people questions. And then we talked about one very, very, very popular way we have in our business to ask people questions is what? Psychological testing. That's how we ask people questions. And then we said, well, anybody can do a test. I could write a test right now. True or false? I like putting chameleons on plaid cloth. True or false? True?
Really hope that's
You're an antisocial. You're a mean person.
It'd be funny.
You're a very mean person. If we're going to have a psychological test, it had to have certain requirements. Remember that? What were they? What was one? What test reliability? What was another? Validity. Now don't forget and don't confuse test validity with what we talked about, internal and external validity. Don't forget all that stuff, you guys. Hey, welcome to grad school. I've had attorneys, judges, a doctor, MDs, nurses, MSWs, tell me that with all those letters behind their name now, they never worked as hard or learned as much as they did in DACT class. Welcome to grad school, you guys. It's a lot, I know. You're going to go out there and affect people's lives.
We needed that first.
It needs to be a lot. Does that make sense? Yes.
I'm going to go back to something that you said. The problem with the naturalistic observation is people change their behavior because they know they're being observed.
Right.
And the problem with the surveys?
The problem with survey is it's the same. We can still have subject reactivity. That people often, they change their answers based on the fact they're being asked a question in the first place. And things like that. A survey does not protect us from subject reactivity.
Or couldn't we ask the question in a particular way to get the
That's all we
response
try
that
and
we
do
want?
is ask those questions the right way. And all that.
And having a psychological testing is,
Pardon me?
and you saying one of the best ways is
It's psychological testing.
Psychological
What is
testing.
psychological testing is also our favorite way to do what? Operationally defined constructs. Those operational definitions. What is an operational definition? It turns a construct into a number. The best way to do that is a psychological test. If I want to know about the construct of your depression, I'll give you the Beck Depression Inventory. If I want to know the construct of your self-esteem, I'll give you the Multimodal Global Self-Esteem Inventory. You see what I'm saying with that? But those tests have to be good. You can't, just because something's a test doesn't mean it's a good test. It has to have reliability and validity. What is reliability? What is validity? Talked about those different issues. Now don't forget, don't confuse that with internal validity external validity. Those were two different things. Test validity. Remember, what is reliability? Is the test giving me
What you're measuring.
consistent results? Test validity is the test
Measures what it's supposed to measure.
measuring what it's supposed to in the first place.
Is standardization in this?
And then we had standardization. Standardization, what is that? A lot of these tests are standardized. And that's what we got into when we started to look at that right there. That's when we started to look at that right there. That bell-shaped or normal curve. That bell-shaped normal curve. And remember when we started to talk about this? Well, one thing is we drew a line right down the middle, didn't we? And what did that line right down the middle? Somebody tell me. Somebody different. Somebody tell me. What did that line right down the middle represent? The what? The mean. What else? Mode. What else? Median. And then a bell-shaped curve. Why do we love that bell-shaped curve so much? Because the mean, the median, and the mode are all the same. For example, an IQ test. The mean, the median, the mode are all 100. And so, knowing that, what do we love to do in science? Make predictions. I get to make a prediction. 50% of the population are at or above 100. 50% are at or below 100. I just made a population. I made a prediction. Do you see what I'm saying with that? That mean score. Why? Of those three, which one do we love even the most? The mean score. Why? What was it about the mean score that we love so much?
It's the best predictor.
It's our best predictor. Why?
With little
Why would
variance.
that be? If 100 is the mean score and 100 is also the most often occurring score, that would be my best guess score then too, wouldn't it? First day of DACT class, everybody walks in here and everybody, let me guess your IQ. What's my best guess? The mean. Guys, over here, these numbers weren't by themselves. These were mean scores. It's not that everybody scored 67. It's on the average. The number. You see what I'm saying with that? We love the mean. Mean. Why? Because if the mean and the mode are both the same, that means it's the most often. My best guess. If the mean and the median are the same, that's why I get to make this 50-50 guess. That kind of stuff like that. Knowing that, we love that. And then we looked at, well, the mean is our best guess. Are there times when the mean can be a better best guess than others? And we looked at that. A or B, which one is 100 the best guess for the mean? Or for this, which one's the best? Why? What's the difference between them?
Standard deviation.
In other words, that other thing, that index of variance called standard deviation. Remember that stuff. Now in Psych 250 class, you're going to be learning how to compute this stuff, aren't they? And it's fun stuff, isn't it? It is fun stuff, isn't it? It's a fun class. You're going to love it every second of it.
I don't believe you. Same.
Standard deviation is the sum of squares divided by n minus 1. That kind of a thing like that. What does this... We love the mean score because it's our best predictor. What is it about the standard deviation? What does that tell us? Why do we like that standard deviation so much?
It gives meaning to your score.
It tells us how much we can trust the mean score. And how did that rule go? The higher the standard deviation, the what?
Worse.
The less we trust the mean. The lower the standard deviation, the what?
Better.
The more we trust the mean. How do we get low standard deviation? Follow the rules of control and that kind of stuff. Have a good measurement. Don't forget, what did I say, you guys? If you don't have a good measurement, if this number here is inaccurate to start with, not a damn thing we do afterwards matters anyway, does it? All that stuff. You need to know this stuff. Like I say, you may never ever do research, not one day in your entire career. But you're going to be consuming somebody else's research every day of your career. you better know what the hell they're talking about. You see what I'm saying with that? This stuff is so important. And don't forget, there was another issue with this. You may not do this kind of research, but as far as I'm concerned, you have an ethical, when we talk about ethics, are we really going to have to spend a lot of time when we get into the counseling stuff about don't have sex with your client? Is anybody going to have a discussion? Are we going to have a discussion about that one? Is anybody going to, yeah, I'd like to talk about that. Anybody going to do that? No, I hope not. Well, here's another major ethical duty you have. To seek to measure is what you're doing working. You don't just willy-nilly fly by the seat of your pants. Do this, and we'll see how it happens. No, you have to scientifically measure with every client. Is this working? And if it's not working, find that out as soon as possible so you can make an adjustment. And it's not always the client's fault. It usually is not the client's fault. It's your fault. Take responsibility and adjust the treatment accordingly. Does that make sense? You see what I'm saying with this stuff, you guys? Yes?
So as I go into my studies and try to do more research, if I find out, even though I believe in the Adonic calculus and the pleasure center and all this stuff, but then also Erickson's views and theories, and they may combine, would I take that to another counselor that may have a little bit more knowledge than me?
Learn from everybody.
And get some help to make sure that my study is correct?
You're going to learn from everybody. All the time. Always check that out. Hey guys, my model, from the very start, you started DACT class, you started building a model. You're going to emerge from this whole program, you're going to have a theoretical model inside you. I do. Well, acquired hedonic cost-habituation syndrome, the hedonic calculus, all that's all my model.
Right.
Every day, my model changes a little bit. Every day. I work with a client, or I talk to a colleague, or I read this, or I think about that. I may have a thought at 2 o'clock in the morning, all of a sudden my model changed. You never know. You're never done developing your understanding of this until the last day of your career. Does that make sense? And so all the time with that stuff. But this idea, you guys, this idea, once again, that we get to make predictions. Yeah, that standard deviation is so very important. As a matter of fact, somebody who maybe needed to find a different hobby, I don't know, maybe they enjoyed this one, who calculated the area under this curve to every possible eventuality under that curve, the areas under this curve. For example, the IQ test, which has a standard deviation of what? 15. If we were to then subdivide this into +1, -1 standard deviation, +2, and so forth, -2 standard deviations, and knowing the area of this curve from here to here is 34%, knowing the area of this curve from here to here is 34%, I could then suggest what? 11585. You see how that works? I could then say that from 85 to 115 is average. And I could also then say 68% of the population score average. Or between 85 and 115. I get to do that stuff with these numbers, isn't that? I love it, love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. I can say this. I get to do that kind of stuff. I get to say this. How about this one? Somebody with an IQ score of 115 scores above 84% of the population. How do I know that? How do I know that?
You're a really smart guy.
Because 50% of the population plus 34 or more percent of the population is 84% of the population. That's how I know that. See how that works?
No.
Yes.
Huh?
No.
So math and science.
I'm dizzy.
I don't get it.
Math and science.
Don't forget, this is the dead center.
Mm-hmm.
100.
Yes.
50% then are going to be at or below 100.
Right.
Same as above.
Okay.
I have calculated that from here to here is 34% of this curve.
Okay.
If I have somebody who's landing right here, that would mean that they're above 50% plus 34 or more percent, or 84% of the
I
curve.
see. Okay.
And you get all
84th
these numbers
percentile.
from your test, right?
Pardon me?
You're getting all these numbers from your test, right?
This is all coming from your research, from your measurements, yes.
Okay, but we're not gonna need to figure this out for the final though, right?
No, you don't have to do that, but you will be doing this in Psych 250.
Well, I'm not in that right now.
Well, but I want you to understand this stuff, you guys, because the basic theoretical questions will be on that test. What is this? What is it all about? Why is this so important? All that kind of stuff. And this is where test reliability, test validity, and things like that come in.
Let's see.
All that kind of stuff like that, you guys.
Okay.
We also then, I mean, this right here is how I think I know this right here. These numbers came from a measurement, the test, that was interpreted via our understanding of this stuff right here. And again, based on this measurement, I've decided everybody gets cognitive therapy. How come? Because my research said so. That's how come. It turns out. What if it turns out that was wrong? And now I'm making people get a kind of therapy that's not good for them, not working for them. You see what I'm saying? It matters how you know where these numbers come from, how you can use them numbers, and limitations to that kind of stuff. It matters. I think I know something right here about type of therapy now because I used this concept right here. Does that make sense?
Right.
It's
Yes.
also very important with that. Gang, we also then talked about, hey, those 4 basic steps, what were those 4 basic steps? Know them. Know what those 4 basic steps were. What was step number 3? Somebody tell me real quick. Step number 3?
For control?
No, 4 basic steps in the very beginning of understanding stuff.
Oh, God. Oh.
What was step number 3? Test the hypotheses. Step number 3, test the hypotheses.
Why don't I have that written down?
That's where we got to, gang. This is where we got to this other thing. Actually, we have 2 hypotheses. What was the first hypothesis?
That's a null.
The null hypotheses. Hey, gang. What if we look at this right here? Let's say that cognitive is mean, group number 1. Humanistic is mean, group number 2. What does the null hypothesis say about?
Mean 1 equals mean 2.
What the hell is that?
That means there's no difference, right?
Well, what are you, 67 don't equal 73. What are you talking about?
It means the only reason the numbers are different in this observation is because of chance.
There you
That's
go.
what Noel would say.
Null would say
Because-
the only reason why these numbers are different is because of what? Chance, error. And if you were to go and measure this time after time after time after that infinity time after time, you would end up with what? They're both the same. You got nothing there. Nice try, nice thought, nice idea. You got nothing there. There's no difference.
But it has nothing to do with the
Actually,
independent
I-
variables, so.
I'll use the proper. What is? Now remember, guys, we're supposed to assume the null hypothesis is correct. To start with, as humility, skepticism, a good scientist. I believe null is correct. Yeah, right. That's why I went to all the trouble to look at it, because I think null's correct.
Right.
I just spent all this time and money to look at something I don't think is there. That's what I did. No, that's not right. No, I think there's something there. As a matter of fact, here's what I think. If you want to know the truth, here's what I think. I think cognitive is going to be less than humanistic. The alternative hypotheses.
But that's only if the variation of null is less than a certain number, right?
Pardon me?
0.5 or
At
something.
0.5, null has to be.
Don't jump. We'll get to
Okay,
that.
sorry.
Because
All
I
I
want.
remembered was 0.5.
Good remember.
Now remember you guys, that null would say these are different because of chance. I'd like to say they're different because of cognitive therapy is different from humanistic therapy. Oh, by the way, don't forget my book, How to Do
Right.
Cognitive Therapy, on the way out today. $59.95, I'll sign it for 10. No agenda there, huh? Which one is correct, null or alternative? That's where we have to do what? What did we call it? What kind of statistics?
Ooh, really complicated.
Statistical significance,
Inferential.
which is like
Inferential statistics.
way above my head.
Inferential statistics. Who's glad we're doing this reminder?
2 hands over here.
For example, this inferential statistics test. Remember this?
No. Maybe.
Yeah, but you told us we didn't need to
You don't
learn all
need to,
that.
you don't need to know this formula,
Okay.
but you need to know the point of it.
Oh, I have that down. I just don't have inferential.
This formula
What the-
would be the formula we would use for this particular study. This formula, like any other formula, gives me a number.
So it's a test probability of what?
If I can,
What does that number tell me?
it tells
Whether or
you
not you
if
can reject the null hypothesis.
What does it specifically tell me?
That you're right.
What does it tell? No, you never know that.
Oh, that you're.
That null is correct?
The probability that null is correct. This number tells me the probability that the null hypothesis is correct.
so
That's what it tells me.
X1
It's not telling me whether or not it gets rejected or not yet. Not yet. All that number is telling me is the probability that null is correct. If, via this formula, we can show the probability null is correct is low enough, then we get to reject the null hypotheses in place of the alternative hypotheses, and now say we have cause-effect knowledge. It appears as if cognitive therapy does reduce, in this observation, it appears as if cognitive therapy reduced that anxiety more than humanistic. Does that make sense?
No.
Yeah, I think.
I see where we get the first jam up there. X1 equals X2. Okay, get that. Got it. We want to say that cognitive therapy is better.
Right.
So we have to measure
What we
To
do is
prove-
we did this right here. Remember, we did our experiment.
yes.
Some people got cognitive, some people got humanistic,
Mhm.
and then we gave them all the same anxiety test,
Mhm.
and the cognitive people scored 67, the humanistic people scored 73.
Right.
These are the numbers.
Right.
Now we ask ourselves, are these numbers the result of real differences or chance factors?
Okay.
Null would say
It's all chance.
chance. In other words, there's nothing going on here. They're not really different. If you measured again and again, they'd be the same because you got nothing here.
Right.
I would say, no, I think this instead.
Mhm.
How do I get to choose which one's right, this one or this one? I have to plug now these statistics
Got that.
into this formula.
But what's the bottom formula?
Don't worry about
represent?
that. I don't want you to worry about this formula.
I want to
Okay.
know what the O stands for.
Observation? I'm
This
guessing.
is
I
a
don't know.
combination of the two individual, I got two sources of variance here.
Uh-huh.
I got group 1 variance and group 2 variance.
Which
And
is
so what this is, I add them together and I average that variance. And then I correct that for the difference in the ends. Don't worry about that.
But that's how you get the null, right?
No, this is how I get this number that tells me the probability that null is correct.
That outcome number is the 0.5 higher or lower, right?
Don't worry about that yet.
Right,
I don't
but-
want you to get there yet.
Well, I can't understand the concept if I can't get there.
Okay, this formula, I take these
I'm-
numbers
I get that, but I mean,
and I
okay.
put them into this formula.
I'm thinking too much about it, maybe.
Yeah.
Don't worry about
Okay.
the formula. You're gonna, this
Okay.
you'll get in 250.
Okay.
I'm not going to ask you to know this formula right now. I'm going to ask
Okay.
you to know that what this formula tells you, it gives me a number like any other formula. 2 and 2 is
Okay.
4. H2O is water. This formula is the probability
Ability.
that null is correct.
Okay.
If I can, with this formula, this number show that the probability that null is correct is very low, then I get
So-
to reject null.
So if it's lower than 0.5,
Just wait a minute. Don't
I
worry
think
about
we just
0.5
need
yet.
to let's see how this plays out.
Yeah,
Okay.
let me-
I
Right now,
think the
all I
issue-
want you to know is
Go.
this number tells me the probability that null is correct.
Okay.
If this number indicates null is correct is low enough, I get to reject null.
Okay.
Has everybody got that? Now, how low does that need to be?
0.05.
You get to choose that.
What?
You get to choose how low. And the very popular in psychological research was 0.05.
So let me tell you, look, what if I choose 0.07?
Then, that's
that
fine,
seems
but
silly.
nobody's going to listen to your research.
Okay. Okay.
You can choose 0.95 if you want.
Okay, gotcha.
You know, see what I'm saying?
So
But
it really has to be based on that standard. You can't just pick whatever you
In
want.
other words, what you're saying at 0.05 is, if I can show that with this number, where did these
Right.
are researched into this formula, give me this number, and if this number can show me that the probability that null is correct is 5% or less, then that'll be low enough. I'm going to reject null in favor of the alternative hypotheses.
Gotcha.
Now, how about this? Pardon me?
Do I have cause and effect?
Then I get to say cause effect. If I get to reject null.
Right.
Okay.
What if I decide 0.05 is still, that's pretty high? I mean, think about that 5%. We're talking about your life here. How about 0.01 instead? What would 0.01 be? That the probability that null is correct is 1% or less. Which one's better? This one or this one?
01.
01.
0.01. Because gang, at some point, don't forget this, at some point, let's say I go 0.05. At some point, you're at the big old conference, and I'm hollering and screaming about my new research here. Oh, don't forget my book out there, How to Do Cognitive Therapy. And I tell you that I rejected null at 0.05, supporting my assertion that cognitive therapy is better. When I just told you that, I just admitted to something too, didn't I? What did I just admit to?
There's a 5% chance that you're wrong.
There's a 5% chance I'm wrong here. Would I rather have a 5% or a 1% chance of wrong?
1%.
I'd rather have a 1% chance of wrong. Why don't? Then why are we partnering out 0.05? Why don't we go 1? Because this is even tougher. This is damn hard.
Oh.
In psychology, it's hard to get 0.05. For Christ's sake, we can't even see the stuff we're measuring.
So does it actually get you cause and effect, or does it get you correlation?
No, by doing this, we can talk about cause-effect. Now, correlation is a whole other statistical. Remember, correlation tells us what? About the strength and the direction of a relationship between two variables, and that can be really cool information, but correlation does not
Equal causation.
mean causation. And you must always remember that.
So inferential statistics is that formula.
Inferring and show
Gotcha.
cause-effect.
Okay.
But we don't need to know that.
Now, guys, I'm not going to ask you to know these numbers so much. No, you're not going to solve inferential statistics in this class. You're going to do that in Psych 250. Right now, though, I do want you to know this because this is so important. This number, whether or not I reject a null hypothesis. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And all that stuff, you guys. Any questions? Let's take a quick break, get back, and who's glad we're doing this reminder?
What you did?
Me.
I don't have to take
What
psych.
you did? All I did,
Huh?
Professor.
What'd I
first
do?
thing I asked him this morning, before we open that door, who can tell me anything about null hypothesis? Because I'm trying to remember. And then here it is. Y'all
Melissa.
y'all
All right,
take
got
that.